All right, we're starting with a little song here. This is on every radio station in the Bahamas today.
That's great.
Woo!
Hi, Tiffany.
Hi. Get in there.
How are you?
Are we live? We're live.
Okay, everyone, we're live.
All right.
Oh my God.
Hello.
No.
I am Sawyer, and Lee, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome everybody to Character Day 2016. We've been having these fantastic conversations all day long. There are over 90,000 events happening around the world in 123 countries. All day long. That we were just listening to was a song that is playing on every radio station in the Bahamas. So we've played it periodically throughout the day. It's been quite fun. And today we have with us Lea Waters, who, oops, my little tech issue here. I'm going to read your official bio because it is quite impressive.
Okay.
Waters is joining us from Australia today, a professor of psychology, the Gary Higgins Chair in Positive Psychology at the University of Melbourne, and is the president-elect of the International Positive Psychology Association. Lea has an affiliate position with Cambridge University and University of Michigan. 2015, she was listed on an Australian top 100 women of influence by the Financial Review and Westpac Bank. She researches strength-based parenting, positive education, and positive organizations. And you also have a new book called The Strength Switch. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And it is already released or it's coming out next summer?
It's coming out next summer by Penguin Press.
The Strength Switch, How the New Science of Strength-Based Parenting Can Help Your Child and Your Teen to Flourish. I'm sure
That's right.
that a lot of people here are really excited to read. So let's start there. What is your definition of strength-based parenting?
Oh, that's a really nice way to start. And strength-based parenting, it's really just a style of parenting where, as a parent, we choose to spend more of our energy and our focus on identifying and building up the positive qualities and the talents and the strengths in our children. And that's our focus before we focus in on, as a parent, trying to kind of fix what's wrong with our children, their weaknesses, their faults, their flaws, their problem behavior. So it's a shift in emphasis to focus first on strength and building up strength before we focus on the weakness.
And what was the inspiration for all this work? Your personal inspiration?
Yeah, look, the inspiration really did come from a personal line of mine, which is that I am a parent. I have a 13-year-old son, Nicholas, and a 9-year-old daughter, Emily. But I'm also a psychologist and a researcher. And so I'd been researching psychology, and I'd started to research positive psychology in my role at the University of Melbourne. And then I became a new mum. And when my son was maybe about 4 weeks old, I sat down to watch the news one night, as I'd done, a lot of other times in my life, and found myself bursting into tears as I was watching the news, and not just the little kind of sniffle, the really, really like the big sobs. There's so much sadness coming out of me, and that kind of piqued a little curiosity in me. As being a psychologist, I always tend to reflect on those things, and I was like, why am I crying? This is just the news. I've watched it so many other times before, and then it sort of hit me that I had a 4-week-old baby boy on my lap, and what he was seeing, even though he wasn't aware of it, is that he was seeing the worst of human nature. The news shows us our greed, our violence, our destruction, our selfishness. And because I was researching in the field of positive psychology, I was like, hang on a minute, this is just not a fair representation of the events that are occurring across the world that day. If the news is supposed to be sharing with us the events that occur across the world, it's a very biased perspective of human nature. And so I just had one of those little epiphany moments where, like, professional Lee, researcher in positive psychology, and then personal Lee, brand new mum, and I was like, we need to find a way to bring strengths more to our young children, to give them more hope about the humanity and all the great strengths that we have that are displayed every day by so many people, but just don't make it onto the big news media corporations.
Absolutely. And I want to focus more. Oh, that's a bad echo. Are you hearing an echo? I'm going to take the headphones off.
Now I can't hear you at all.
Oh, lovely technology. Now can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So I definitely want to talk more about the shift towards that positive, because that's the big insight that we're talking all throughout all of Character Day about, and now we're releasing things all year round for Character Every Day sort of mentality. But first, why do you think that the news has shifted so much, or not shifted? Why do you think the news does focus so much on that fear, that negativity, that amygdala piercing sort of visual and vibe and voice? Where do you think that even comes from?
I think that the big news media corporations have an interest in airtime and getting viewership, and they run on a mantra of bad news sells. And maybe at one point in time that might have been true, but I would like to think that if they went out and retested the market these days, they might not find that that's as true as it used to be. Particularly when the news started, it sort of came onto our television sets once a day, and maybe you would read the newspaper, but it's really intensified nowadays. The news is everywhere. It's 24/7. We have 24-hour news stations, for example. You flick onto your phone and the first thing that comes up is the news. It's on billboards, it's on the shop windows, it's on radios. It's really
Screens, it's
intensified. And even with my two children, my son last year, he's had to get a tablet for school. And so all of a sudden the news was in our home, because even when he was doing his homework or playing games on his iPad, little bits of news were like kind of streaming down the side until I figured out how to shut that off. But so I think it's intensified. I think that they're hopefully working on an outdated notion of what the market wants. I know that since I've done my TED Talk, I've had people from all over the world email me to say, thanks for your TED Talk, I'm turning off the news. I don't want to watch the big news anymore. And we are seeing examples of good news stations coming forward, and good news blogs and good news papers. And so I think there's a growing market demand for the good news, but the big media corporations haven't kept up with it yet.
And so what is your advice to have a well-rounded good news source? So, not having a wonderful conversation with Dr. Michael Rich last night, who made an astute comment, I think, that in many ways, social media is allowing us to curate our feed so much that we're not getting a broad enough perspective. And
right.
So the more that we're, and of course, big news is giving us one perspective as well. And so the purpose, hopefully we're getting an all-around view. But do you have any advice on how to filter the news through a more positive lens, but still get a full view?
Yeah, because we do need to be realistic, I think. The key is balance. So I think there's kind of three parts to the triangle. There's the big news, recognizing that when you watch it, as you said before, Sawyer, it's really designed to promote fear and anxiety in us. I mean, these are kind of easy emotions to bring forward in people because they're very primal. But people say, well, I need to watch the news because I do need to be aware of, unfortunately, a terrorist attack or those kinds of things. Be aware of it, but put it into perspective. Be sad about it. I mean, those things are tragic, but when those things are causing anxiety and depression in people all over the world, then it's gotten out of balance. I do a lot of work with schools in the school system here in Australia, and I had a teacher tell me the other day, she's a second grade teacher, that one of the little girls is too scared to come to school because she thinks there will be a terrorist attack at school, and that unfortunately the news is causing a lot of racial tension in this particular school, which has a lot of mixed races. So be aware of it. Be aware of it in terms of what you need to know, but don't overstate the case. So that's the kind of first part of the triangle. I think the second part of the triangle is taking charge of our own news, and that is through news channels and social media that we have access to, starting to try to counterbalance and share the everyday news of the everyday people. I mean, there's a reason why we refer to ourselves as a humankind, and that's because kindness is just such a primal part of who we are, in the same way that stress and anxiety is a primal part of who we are. And there's a beautiful expression by Dashner Kelter, and he says, well, yes, definitely as a species we relied on survival of the fittest, but we also relied on survival of the kindest. And it was survival of the kindest that helped us get through, because, you know, it's one thing to be physically fit and able to kind of kill the big beast, but if we didn't have kindness as a species, then how do we share food? How do we share shelter? How do we bond together to build a new heart, to procreate? You know, so survival of the kindness was equally as important. And so using our social media channels to showcase the best qualities in human nature. Now, there's a downside to that, because we can be tempted to sort of over manufacture what we put onto our social media and say, look at me, I'm amazing, and I'm just always happy, and I'm always on a tropical island somewhere. And so we need to be real about it. But I think be real, but when in doubt, have a positive bias and go more towards the positive stories. And then the third part of that triangle is these new positive news corporations that are coming out. And there's plenty of positive news sites. I can't think of them right now, but I can send you the details if you want to put it up on your site. There's a number of Huffington Post, for example. They have a good news feed. So kind of balancing it between those three triangles, I think, is a good way to go.
Well, and everything you're saying is about, and I love the thinking of survival of the fittest to survival of the kindness, because it's not an either or. None of this is an either or situation. It's an and both.
Exactly.
Positive psychology ideology is about, and we've been talking about this for so long, and we also need to be talking about this. And so it's the same thing with
That's right.
all the news that we're, you know, the triangle that you just articulated is, and I love that thinking of it as a positive bias. It's take it all in and lean towards positive bias.
Yeah.
You do a lot of work with, you've done a lot of, and of course you just mentioned Dr. Keltner, who's right across the bay here in Berkeley, but gratitude, a lot of work in gratitude. And
yes.
So how does gratitude, of course it's all related to everything you've just been talking about, but it seems like there's a lot of your work is about the impact of news and media and sort of this positive and negative and filtering those two things in our lives. But where does gratitude fit into all of that?
That's a really lovely question, because gratitude is a really profound A, emotion, and B, social action. So I find gratitude really fascinating, because a lot of other positive emotions, they just kind of stay as emotions. And so if we feel joy, for example, that's a positive emotion that we experience that has a whole host of positive benefits for us. What gratitude does, why gratitude's a really powerful emotion, is that it's pro-social emotion. So that's a fancy term that we psychologists use to say that it's an emotion that connects us with others. And so the interesting thing about gratitude is that when you experience the emotion of gratitude, you're almost always compelled to share it with the person who has triggered that emotion in the first place. And so what that means is that, so you do something nice for me, Sawyer, and I get this little warm bubble of gratitude because I feel validated and I feel seen and I feel like someone cares for me. But instead of holding that inside myself, I'm pretty much compelled to say, thanks so much for doing that. And I really appreciate that you took the time to do that. Or even if I don't say it immediately, a couple of days later, I might, notice that you're a bit low on energy. So I'll zip out and get you a cup of coffee and bring it into work. Or so it's a reciprocal emotion. And then what that does is that makes you feel good because you feel that, oh, I've done something that's been recognized. And so it sets up this positive spiral. And so it's a favorite positive emotion of mine because it has those kind of pro-social benefits. But another reason why I really like gratitude is because in addition to being an emotion, it's also a cognition. And what I mean by that is that gratitude in its essence is about noticing and appreciating the good things in your life. And so that requires some level of cognition. It requires some level of attention and thought processing to A, notice, and then B, appreciate. So when gratitude breaks down, it's often because one of those two things hasn't occurred. So firstly, we've just been too busy to notice the sunshine or the smell of coffee or a kind gesture that someone's done to us. So we miss this opportunity for gratitude because we didn't notice. Sometimes we actually do the first step and we notice, but we fail to appreciate. And that's because we take people for granted. We feel a sense of entitlement. We feel like, well, I did something for you the other day, so you kind of owe me, so I'm not going to thank you for that. So there's multiple ways that it can break down. But the lovely part about the fact that gratitude is it's a cognition as well as an emotion is that it's a perspective taking phenomenon. So when I can go into a state of gratitude, everything expands. I look at the world differently, I appreciate the world differently, and I have a new perspective compared to a few minutes earlier when I'm looking at the world and not being in a state of gratitude. So it's a very broadening emotion. It expands us, it gives us perspective of other people, it helps us to count our blessings, find benefit even during hard times.
Now, you said a state of gratitude, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And you've also talked a few times, and I'm also noticing that there are questions coming from the audience, so we're going to go to them in a second. But
okay, yeah,
primal strengths and reflexes and things a number of times as well. And so my question is, our periodic table of character strengths. So there's 24 character strengths based on Martin Seligman's 24 and the VIA Institute's 24 strengths classified under virtues. Are these all primal? Are they all reciprocal in nature? And are they all ones that we go into states of? Or do they, or is gratitude in a somewhat different category than the other ones? Or I guess that's my question.
Yeah, and they're really, really good questions. And they're questions that positive psychologists have sort of been thinking about and struggling with for a good 15 years. I think that there are what we call kind of primal emotions and then secondary emotions. And so usually the secondary emotions are defined as ones that require some sort of cognitive process before we feel. So primal emotions, positive primal emotions are probably things like joy or love. You don't sort of have to think about it. You just feel it like straight away. And likewise with negative emotions.
They're also things that one can strengthen, practice, and work on. So they're primal and you have this innate response, but they're also things that we can develop over.
Yes, absolutely. And, going right back to Plato, he talked about virtue as something that we can cultivate. And it's both a trait and a state in terms of your second question. All of those things, well, what we know is that the character strengths are universal. So everyone has them. They manifest in slightly different ways for different people based on personality, based on race, religion, gender, those kinds of things. We have them all. Some of us, and so they're partly inborn, they're partly what psychologists would call a trait response. And so for some people, let's go to the example of gratitude. Some people are just naturally more grateful than others. So we would say that they have a higher level of trait gratitude. That's a really kind of core part of their personality. So for all your viewers out there who've done the VIA character strengths, if gratitude is in their top 5, we would say that they're very strong on trait gratitude. But the other part about gratitude, and a lot of the virtues there on your periodic table, is that you can also cultivate states of gratitude. So when I'm teaching my students at the university, I talk about kind of trait gratitude, and you've got like the Father Christmas kind of persona who's just like happy and grateful about everything. And then you've got the Grinch down the other end who's like just grumpy. But even the Grinch can have moments of gratitude. They can have these states of gratitude. So they can work on developing their gratitude, and it can be triggered by things that occur in their environment. A lot of people talk about gratitude as an attitude, that it's something that if you choose to deliberately identify and notice the good things in your life, you can cultivate an attitude of gratitude. So that's about bringing those state moments of gratitude into play a lot more often. And there is a kind of theory that you can shift your set point. So even if you're not naturally high on gratitude in terms of trait, if you practice it often enough, you start to shift your personality towards that way.
Well, that is a segue into, and we only have a couple minutes left, but there are 2 questions here from the audience that I wanted to ask. One is about how any specific practices and activities for parents for how strength-based parenting can cultivate character. But even let's just talk about gratitude. So or anything else you'd like to. But how does that translate in practical terms?
Yeah, look, we can talk about it more generally, just any of those strengths. There's a couple of key steps. The first thing is to learn what the strengths are as a parent, to actually know what the character strengths are. So go onto the VIA Institute, identify the strengths, do the survey yourself, download their posters, put the posters up on your refrigerator or somewhere where you're going to see them. So you start to actually learn what the character strengths are, because we all have a natural bias where it's easy to spot the strengths that you have. So my top strength is kindness and generosity, and I see that in my two kids all the time. But something like kind of teamwork or prudence, I don't see that as readily, because it's not one of my core strengths. So learn the strengths firstly, then engage in the strength spotting. Strength spotting is just a simple technique. Again, this is this kind of brain training of looking first for what your child is doing well before what they're doing wrong, and deliberately engaging in, okay, today or this week I'm going to focus on the wisdom strengths. I'm going to really try and look for and spot the wisdom strengths that I see in my child. I'm going to see their curiosity, I'm going to see their love of learning, whatever it happens to be. A really good way of encouraging strengths is to find a strength role model for your child. So hopefully you are a strengths role model, but there may be a strength in your child that you can see that's very clear that you don't necessarily have in abundance yourself. So connecting them up with people in the neighbourhood, people in the community, their teachers, family members, or even people that they don't know. I mean, the Olympics, which was recently on in Rio, that was a great example of strengths role models, perseverance, teamwork, forgiveness, all sorts of strengths came through there. So connecting your child up with a strengths role model. And two more things I'd say. One is, once you've done the strength spotting, write your child a strengths letter. Write them a letter to say, these are the strengths that I see in you. This is how I see you use them every day. So make it really real and concrete. And this is how I see that these strengths are going to help you to grow up to be a good person, who does well in society and contributes to others. And then the final thing that I'd say is use life transitions. If you have a child who's about to start middle school, or about to start elementary school, or is about to go away on camp, or is about to start something new, use life transitions, because they're always a time of uncertainty, and they're often a time where you can, as a parent, you can really connect your child up with their strengths to say that even though the environment is a little bit uncertain for you right now, there are some certainties about you. These are core parts of who you are, and they travel with you wherever you go. They're like these transportable resources that you have that are going to help you out in this new phase of your life.
That is beautiful. Next to so many of the different conversations that we've been having today. Dr. Ken Ginsberg earlier has a book, How to Raise a 35-year-old, I think it's called, right? How to Raise an Adult, about how to raise a 35-year-old. And one of the things is really looking at a young child. I'm thinking my child is about to turn 1, and I'm thinking that I could write a strength letter to a 1-year-old and file it away and have it be something that we look at in a couple of years and keep revisiting it throughout, because so much of it is our core from the beginning, and then how we cultivate that through life. So that
absolutely. That's a really beautiful idea.
And then I also wanted to call out one other thing that you said, which I think is, I've never really quite thought about it in this way, of how we see our own strengths easily in other people. And I wonder if do we also easily see strengths that we don't have in other people? Do we recognize those? Or is it like one end and the other? Or is there research showing that we really identify strengths closest to ours and others?
Here's what the research says. We tend to identify, we can see other people, the strengths that we have, we can see more easily. The strengths that we don't have, but we wish we had, so the strengths that we really value, we can see in other people. The strengths that we don't have, that we don't really value or don't care about, we find those hard to see. And so that's where you might have a parent-child mismatch, where, you've got a parent who's really zestful, really extroverted, really outgoing, and then you've got a child who's a little bit more introverted, a little bit more cautious, a little bit more prudent. So it's hard for the parent to see that, particularly if the parent doesn't value that. And so you've got these amazing strengths in a child that the parent is sort of blind to. And that's why the first step is to really just go back to your student days and become a student and learn the character strengths first and foremost. The flip side to that is that we can see our children's strengths. We can see our own strengths in our children more readily. We can also see our own weaknesses in our children more readily. And this is this psychological process called projection. And when we project, it's because there's a quality in us that we don't like, that we're not comfortable with. And so we see it more clearly in our children, and we come down on it hard because their children are like a social mirror. When we see our child being disorganized or impatient or muddle-headed, and we know that that's a quality in ourselves, and our child is mirroring that to us, and we don't want to own that in ourselves, we project and we really push that down. So that's why we have this tendency to pay more attention to their weaknesses than their strengths. And that's why I come back to the large-scale research I've been doing in looking at how do we shift that focus so that the parent looks first for the strengths in their children before they seek fix weakness.
Well, I imagine.
And as you said, it's not an either or. It's not ignoring the child's weaknesses and both. But focus first on.
Absolutely, and I'm going to explore all of those in great, wonderful detail in the Strength Switch, how the new science of strength-based parenting can help your child and your teen flourish, coming out next summer. And we're a couple minutes over time, so we're going to wrap it up. Thank you for everybody listening and sending in questions, and thank you so much, Lee, for your time. And what time is it where you are?
It is almost 9 a.m. in the morning.
All right. Excellent.
Yeah, so I'm just about to, I'm speaking to you from the future. I'm about to start the next day.
I know
we're ahead here in Australia.
Wow. All right.
The future is really good. It's sunny outside. It's going to be a nice day for everyone in the world. I can just tell you that now because I'm speaking to you from the future. So.
Awesome. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. Have a good day. Have a good Friday.
Thanks, Lea.
Okay.
See you.